Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tiravanachari Jamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jam Vishnupad Paramhamsa Raj Gajari Shota Shota Shri Srimati Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Shri Shri Radha Kalachandji Ki Shri Shri Jagannath Baldev Subhadramai Ki Shri Shri Gaurnitai Ki ISKCON Palace Ki Nittai Gaur Premanandi. All glories to some devotees. All glories to some devotees. All glories to some devotees. All glories, Lord Sweet Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Brinda Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Brinda Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Brinda Hare Krishna. So we're reading from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrta, Madhya Lila, chapter 11, the Beda Kirtan pastimes, verse 10. Verse 10. Yes, correct. Prabhu kohe tathapi raja kala sarpakara Kala sarpaka Kashtanari sparshe yaiche upaje vikara Prabhu kohe tathapi raja kala sarpakara Kashtanari sparshe yaiche upaje vikara Prabhu kohe tathapi raja kala sarpakara Kashtanari sparshe yaiche upaje vikara प्रभु कहे तथापि प्रभु कहे तथापि राजा काला सर्पाकार काष्ठ नारी स्पर्शयैच उपजे विकार काष्ठ नारी कहे तथापि राजा काला सर्पाकार One more, Mataji. प्रभु कहे तथापि राजा काला सर्पाकार काष्ठ नारी स्पर्शयैच उपजे Prabhu kahe. Lord Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu replied, Tathapi, still, Raja, the king, Kala Sarpa Akar, just like a venomous snake, Kashta Nari, a woman made of wood, Sparshe, by touching, Yaiche, as, Upaje, arises, Vikar, agitation. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, although it is correct that the king is a great devotee, he is still to be considered a venomous snake. Similarly, even though a woman be made of wood, one becomes agitated simply by touching her form. Purport. Sri Chanakya Pandit, in his moral instructions, has stated, Tyaja Durjana Samsargam Bhaja Sadhu Samagamam. This means that one has to abandon the association of materialistic people and associate with spiritually advanced people. However qualified a materialist may be, he is no better than a venomous serpent. Anyone knows that a snake is dangerous and poisonous, and when its hood is decorated with jewels, it is no less poisonous or dangerous. However qualified a materialist may be, he is no better than a snake decorated with jewels. One should therefore be careful in dealing with such materialists, just as one would be careful in dealing with a bejeweled serpent. Even though a woman be made of wood or stone, she becomes attractive when decorated. One becomes sexually agitated even by touching the form. Therefore one should not trust his mind, which is so fickle that it can give way to enemies at any moment. The mind is always accompanied by 6 enemies, namely Kama, Krodha, Mad, Moha, Matsarya, and Bhai. That is lust, anger, intoxication, illusion, envy, and fear. Although the mind may be merged in spiritual consciousness, one should always be very careful in dealing with it, just as one is careful in dealing with a snake. One should never think that his mind is trained and that he can do whatever he likes. One interested in spiritual life should always engage his mind in the service of the Lord, so that the enemies of the mind, who always accompany the mind, will be subdued. If the mind is not engaged in Krishna consciousness at every moment, there is a chance that it will give way to its enemies. In this way, we become victims of the mind. Chanting the Hare Krishna mantra engages the mind at the lotus feet of Krishna constantly. Thus, the mind's enemies do not have a chance to strike. Following Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's example in these verses, we should be very careful in dealing with the mind, which should not be indulged in any circumstance. Once we indulge the mind, it can create havoc in this life, even though we may be spiritually advanced. The mind is specifically agitated through the association of materialistic men and women. Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, through his personal behavior, warns everyone to avoid meeting a materialistic person or a woman. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Grim Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Gurundinataranam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. My name's Anand Chaitanya Das. You can probably tell I'm from England. I'm from London. I was born and bred in London. These days I live in Hungary, Budapest, Hungary. And it's a pleasure to be here in ISKCON Dallas, a very, in many ways, famous temple with a lot of history. So many wonderful things have happened here. So thank you to Nishingarupu for having us. And a wonderful section of Chaitanya Caritamrta, very interesting. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is teaching by his example. Apaniyachari bhakti sikhainu sabare. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu teaches how to be a devotee through his own example. And here he's making a particularly pointed instruction. Maharaj Prataparudra, he's a great devotee. He's a pure devotee. He's absorbed in Krishna consciousness. He's a great devotee of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And there's one thing that he wants. He just wants an audience with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He just wants to be able to meet the Lord one-to-one. But Mahaprabhu is rejecting that proposal. And this goes on. There's various times where this point comes up. Please, and various devotees, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, many devotees come to Mahaprabhu, Ramananda Rai, through various ways and means they try to persuade Mahaprabhu, please meet this king. He's such a wonderful devotee. But Mahaprabhu sticks on the point. He's a king. He's a pounds and shillings man. He's dealing with management and materialistic people. He's having to deal with money. He's dealing with so many things of the world, and therefore, naturally, his mind will be tainted with materialism. And therefore, I do not want to associate with such a person, because that will be a danger for my spiritual life. So this is a point that Mahaprabhu keeps hammering. At one point he says, if you keep pushing this point, if you're trying to force me to meet Maharaj Prataparudra, I'm going to leave. You'll never see me here in Puri again. So at that point, the devotees have to step back, because nothing's worth that. But they can see that Prataparudra is such a sincere person. He's a pure devotee. So then this dichotomy continues. Eventually, of course, we all know the story. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's at Rath Yatra. He's absorbed in chanting the holy names and dancing. And then Prataparudra comes at that point. He's well advised. He comes at that point. Mahaprabhu's resting. And he comes in, he begins to sing the wonderful Gopi Gita. And Tava Caithamritam Tapta Jivanam. And in this way, with these wonderful verses, this wonderful song, he comes and gets into Mahaprabhu's association, into his confidence. He massages him, and in that way has his audience. He succeeds in the end. But Mahaprabhu is making a very important point, something which is very instructive for a practicing devotee, to stay away from worldly minded people. How does it go? The verse, Chaitanya Caritamrta, materialistic association, Krishna Bhakta Ar. It ends with Krishna Bhakta Ar. Stay away from worldly minded association. I'm sure it will come back to me. So this comes up. Asat Sangatyagat Ai Vaishnavachar. Sri Sangi Eka Sadhu Krishna Bhakta Ar. So Asat Sangatyagat, one has to give up worldly minded association. It's an instruction which is quite obvious. It keeps coming up in scripture because a man is known by the company he keeps. We are naturally affected by the people that we surround ourselves with. I remember when I was newer to Krishna consciousness, I thought, I'm strong. I don't think I'm going to be affected by the people that I'm around. I grew up in London, surrounded by all sorts of people, but I felt a certain internal confidence that I thought I'd be okay. But over time, I realized we're all affected by the people that we spend time with. It's inevitable. And if that's good association, then it elevates. If it's materialistic association, then it degrades. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that worse than association for a man, worse than association with a woman, and of course when we hear these points, the opposite is there for a woman. Worse than association for a woman, worse for a woman, worse than association with a man, is association with those who are attached to the opposite sex, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says. Because that kind of association really infiltrates the consciousness in a very special type of way. So we have to be very careful about who we associate with. I remember there was one devotee, I'm preaching in Hungary, so we have mainly almost completely Hungarian audience. And there was a young man who joined the temple, and I spent maybe 2 years arguing with him about giving up worldly-minded association. He just couldn't let go of his old friends because he had so many cherished memories with them. They, went canoeing together, they did this together, they did that together, which, some relatively innocent things. There's nothing wrong with canoeing per se, I guess. Although Narad Muni says that he was not interested in mundane sports. I quoted that to him many times also. But they also smoked together and chased after women together. So every time he went home to his hometown and associated with these people, he came back disturbed, affected by that association. And I kept arguing with him, saying, better you don't go home. Because when you come back, I have to spend weeks repairing you and giving you some kind of inspiration and trying to bring you back to spiritual consciousness, because that materialistic consciousness infiltrates. But he just wouldn't accept the point. It took him a long, long time, some ups and downs and some real bumps before he eventually kind of got the point. But these attachments are there. Materialistic attachments are there in the heart of the conditioned soul. And sometimes it can be very difficult to let go of those things. Sometimes it takes so long to let go of attachments. And at first those attachments may be quite gross, but over time as a devotee advances, they may let go of the gross attachments, but the internal attachments get subtler and subtler and subtler. As one advances in Krishna consciousness, it becomes more and more exacting. What we have to give up becomes more and more pointed, deeper, and the attachment becomes deeper. And it's more and more difficult to let go. Number one, because it's subtle, and number two, because it's a deeper seated attachment. So this attachment to the material energies there, Srila Prabhupada would emphasize to the devotees that one should be very careful of the material energy. One of his complaints, Srila Prabhupada would say, that devotees are not fearful enough of the material energy. One should have a healthy disgust for the material world, Srila Prabhupada said. Once Prabhupada was in an airport and he had some disciples, brahmachari sannyasis surrounding him, and he was talking to them, preaching to them. And then Prabhupada was facing them, they were facing him, and then all of their heads just turned one way and then followed. And then Prabhupada looked around and it was a woman. And then Prabhupada said to them, "Beautiful, isn't she?" And then their heads all went down, they were embarrassed, they got caught by their spiritual master. And then Prabhupada said, "But what are you going to do about it?" And they didn't say anything, they were too embarrassed to say anything, of course, and Prabhupada said, "Absolutely nothing." So the attachment may be there for the material energy, But what are you going to do about it? Absolutely nothing. And in the same time, we practice Krishna consciousness. So very often, we have a lot of emphasis on the don'ts. Don't do this, don't do this. We have the 4 regulative principles. You know, you're not meant to do this, don't do this. Sarve vidhi nishedasyor eteyor eva kinkara. There's many rules and regulations, many things that we're not meant to do. But to always remember Krishna and to never forget Krishna is the fundamental principle. And all other rules and regulations are servants, are servitors of this principle to always remember Krishna. So sometimes we focus a lot on the negative. Don't do this, don't do this. This isn't allowed. And that's important. That has a purpose, of course. But at the same time, it pays to focus in on what we should do. And maybe we don't talk about that enough. How do we actually cultivate Krishna consciousness? How do we cultivate a deeper attachment and attraction towards Krishna? Because as we cultivate a higher taste, param drishtva nivartate, we let go of the lower taste. And so Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said that very often there's this focus on anartha nivriti, neti neti, not this, not this, not this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. If you focus so much on not doing, no, 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 you end up being a Mayavadi. That's what Mayavadis do. Neti, neti, not, no, 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 no. And then you end up with nothing. So he said, alongside anartha nivriti, there has to be a cultivation of artha pravriti. A cultivation of the positive aspects of Krishna consciousness. A deeper attachment towards hearing and chanting about Krishna ultimately. Because that is what really helps us to let go. Because as we said, it can be very subtle. Material attachments can be very subtle. Raghunath Das Goswami says in his Manashiksha, Pratishta Shah, it's one of the last things to go, the desire for Pratishta. He said even a very advanced devotee, Ruchi, Asakti, a devotee can have this subtle attachment for the desire for name and fame. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Na dhanam, na janam, na sundarim. Okay, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this. We say, Arana koriho mane asha. Yeah, let there be no other desire in my heart. But this desire for Pratishta, Raghunath Das Goswami, is one of the last things to go. How do you get rid of that desire? He says that one has to take shelter of one of the commanders-in-chief of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's army. And he will kick that desire out of the heart. And that's his instruction. So how does he kick that desire out of the heart? Number one, okay, he'll make you humble. He'll correct and guide. But another aspect of his method is by injecting real Krishna bhakti into the heart, the real desire for Krishna. We chant every morning, Ei nivedana dharu sakhiranugata karo. It's deep. Sometimes devotees outside of ISKCON, and even sometimes devotees inside ISKCON, they say, well, we don't really have access to everything in ISKCON. There's deeper aspects. I was talking to one devotee, and they're on yatra in Govardhan a few months ago, and they said they saw many devotees, ISKCON devotees, who were going to Babaji's in Radhakund for something deeper, for something more, for a deeper insight into bhakti, maybe to receive some mantra or some insight into their siddha deha, their spiritual form, etc., etc. So, there are so many things that devotees are looking for, and sometimes the devotees feel that Prabhupada didn't give everything. Prabhupada was focusing on a worldwide mission, preaching to an audience which was unfamiliar with bhakti, and therefore he had to really focus on the basics. He had to focus on topics like give up worldly-minded association, because someone who's steeped in bhakti, someone who for them it's just natural, it's in their veins. These are basics. Why do we need to go through these things? What's the purpose? I don't need to hear this anymore. I want the higher aspects of Krishna consciousness. But actually, particularly in Caitanya Caritamrta, if we read Madhya 8, which we just passed, we're in Madhya 11 now, Ramananda Rai's teachings, if we read Adi 4, Prabhupada's purports are littered with insights, with jewels, with gems, which give a more seasoned practitioner a lot of fuel to practice a deeper Krishna consciousness, to really cultivate an attachment and an attraction towards Krishna. This is not Sahajiism. This is our right. This is our birthright. This is what Krishna consciousness is actually about. To develop an attachment and an attraction towards Krishna. Krishna's name, form, qualities, abode, associates and pastimes. Very early on in our society, Srila Prabhupada translated, he knew, will I be able to finish the Bhagavatam or not? He wasn't sure. He was going through, he already had Canto 1 when he arrived in America, and he was going through Canto 2, Canto 3. Will he get to the Summum Bonum, Canto 10? He wasn't sure. So he did a summary study of Canto 10 in the form of the Krishna book, so that when devotees chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, these names, Hare, Srimati Radharani, Krishna, the all-attractive one, and Ram, the reservoir of all pleasure, Krishna. What does Ram mean? Some devotees say it means Lord Ramachandra. Some devotees say it means Lord Balaram. But for us, Prabhupada translated it as the reservoir of all pleasure. Who's the reservoir of all pleasure? It's Krishna. Krishna. Krishna is the reservoir of all pleasure. So, who's that person? Who is this Krishna that we're speaking of? And therefore, Prabhupada gave Canto 10 so that devotees could really... he gave a summary study of Canto 10 in the form of Krishna book, so that when devotees are reading, when they're chanting, this name Krishna, this name Rama, this name Hara, is pregnant with meaning. It has depth. I know who that Krishna is, and I have insight into his name, his form, his qualities, his abode, his associates, and his wonderful, amazing, multifarious pastimes. And I have some connection with those things. And that's the goal of Krishna consciousness. There was one devotee in London. I remember, I've been living in Hungary now for 10 years. I was in Bhaktivedanta Manor at the time, so it was maybe 15 years ago, maybe 20. But there was a devotee who was once living in Bhaktivedanta Manor, and then he left, and he came back to visit. And he just wanted to speak about Krishna. You know, he was a traveler. He didn't have so much responsibility. He was just reading and chanting, basically. That was his program. So he just wanted to speak about Krishna. And one day I was sitting with him at lunch, and he was kind of chewing my ear off. He was just speaking about Krishna. You know, I couldn't have a word in edgeways. He was just speaking and speaking and speaking. And he was so eager just to speak about Krishna. I read this, and this Acharya says this, and he was just speaking. And then I was just watching my clock because I had a meeting, and I remember it was 5 to 2. And I said, Prabhu, I had to interrupt him. I said, Prabhu, I'm really sorry. I've got a meeting at 2. I have to run. I have to go. And then he just blew up. He said, what's the problem with you guys? Everyone I speak to just seems too busy to speak about Krishna. No one's interested. What are we? Are we the International Society for Krishna Consciousness or what? And I said, Prabhu, I'm really sorry. I get your point, but I do have a meeting to go to. I'm not making it up, you know. So I had to excuse myself and leave, wash my plate, and run to my meeting. But his words struck me, and it left a mark. It was a long time ago, but I still remember. At the end of the day, sometimes when someone's speaking about Krishna, we wonder, hey, is this guy a Sahajiya? You know, they kind of get this label, you know, he just wants to speak about Krishna all the time. I don't know about Dallas, but this is the mood at least we had then. That this guy, maybe he's just a pretender. You know, maybe he's just, you know, is there real substance to this? Is this what we're meant to do? And over the years, maybe I'm wrong, but do we do enough of that in our society, where devotees just come together and speak about topics of Krishna? Tava Caitanyamritam tapta jivanam kavibiriditam kalmasapaham shravana mangalam shrimadatatam bhuvi ganantiye bhurida janaha. Just to speak about Krishna. And in this way, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, mat chitta mat kata pranaha bodhyantascha parashparam katyantascha mam nityam tushyanti cha ramanti cha. When my devotees come together and they speak topics of me, when they speak about me, they share with one another, they naturally become inspired in Krishna consciousness. Tushyanti cha, satisfied, and ramanti cha, great pleasure, great satisfaction is derived from this very simple act. Srila Prabhupada said Krishna consciousness is so simple, we may just miss it. May just miss it. It just seems so simple. Come together and speak about Krishna. You know, for years I just read alone. When I was studying at school, college, university, my habit was to study alone. I never studied with other people. It just worked for me that way. And when I came to Krishna consciousness, that also kind of continued, that habit continued. But then I kept hearing, read with devotees, read with devotees. There was one devotee at Bhaktivedanta Manor who was really pushing this. And so one day I did it. I read with another devotee. We sat down for an hour, I was persuaded, and we just read together. And I felt so inspired. And then after some time, I made it a regular habit just to read with other devotees. And actually, there's so much more taste in that activity as compared to just reading alone, practicing Krishna consciousness alone. It's Sankirtan. When devotees come together and we hear and chant, this is Sankirtan. And Jiva Goswami says that Sankirtan is the king of all sadhanas. There's many different elements of sadhana, spiritual practice, but the king of all sadhanas is to come together with other devotees and to hear and chant together. It's very, 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 very potent. And in this way, we gain an attraction towards Krishna. And I'm not necessarily talking about ruchi and asakti. Of course, those should be our aspirations. And this is another topic about aspiring. What do we aspire for in life? Before you come to Krishna consciousness, then naturally many devotees in our communities are Indian-bodied. So, you know, like my parents, they moved to the UK from India. Many of you will have moved from India to America with great aspirations. The American dream, fulfilling all of your desires and more. The land of freedom, the land of opportunity. So naturally, when you move to another country, there are so many plans and desires, whether it be education, getting top grades out of a good university, and then getting a top job, having a house in a particular area, having a particular car, a particular social circle. There are so many aspirations which we naturally have in life, in material life. In the same way, in spiritual life, we should also have aspirations, goals, desires. What do we desire in spiritual life? What are our spiritual desires? We talk about the purification of the heart. What does that mean? What does it mean for the heart to become purified? It means that there are material desires in the heart of the conditioned soul. But those material desires have to be replaced with spiritual desires. So then what are spiritual desires? What are spiritual desires? We have to desire, okay, first of all, where am I at in spiritual life? What is my stage of devotion? So then a devotee often will say, oh, I'm just a beginner. I'm not even at Shraddha. If you talk about Shraddha to Prema, sometimes devotees say that. And that may be fine to be said to others, to cultivate a level of humility. But at the same time, a devotee has to have a clear idea, where am I at in my own spiritual life? What stage of devotion am I at? Yeah? So, Shraddha, Sadhusanga, Anartha-nivritti, etc., etc. Nishta. So a devotee, if one finds oneself at Anartha-nivritti, one's initiated, the end of bhajana kriya is one's accepted a spiritual master, one's initiated, and then they say Anartha-nivritti starts in truth. Of course, Anartha-nivritti is there from the beginning, but they say after initiation, Anartha-nivritti begins in truth. So then if one finds oneself at Anartha Nivritti, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur explains the various levels and the various obstacles that are there at Anartha Nivritti. But then how do I get to Nishta? My goal is prema. Actually, Rupa Goswami says, he gives a definition of sadhana in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So Rupa Goswami gives a very technical definition for all of the stages of devotion. That's why it's called the science of devotion. So he says the definition of sadhana, he says, Kriti sadhya bhavet sadhya bhava sa sadhana bida. He says that the sadhana bhakti, the definition of sadhana bhakti is those activities by which one cultivates bhava bhakti. So the goal of sadhana bhakti is bhava bhakti. He splits, Rupa Goswami splits sadhana bhakti, bhava bhakti and prema bhakti. So sadhana bhakti is those activities, primarily hearing and chanting, by which I cultivate bhava. So the goal for a sadhaka, I want bhava. And then of course when you get to bhava, then you want prema. But bhava can seem so far away. Like George Harrison says, I really want to see you. Yeah? In My Sweet Lord, he says, I really want to see you. But he says, but it takes so long. So when do we get darshan of the Lord? It's described that at bhava, one becomes qualified to see Krishna face to face. But once. In Narad Muni's example, he gets to see Krishna once. The Lord comes before him once, and then he goes and he says, you won't see me again in this body. This is to create a desire in your heart to see me more and more. So you go deeper and deeper into your spiritual practice. So you let go of unwanted habits, of unwanted desires. You're ready to let go of everything else just in order to be able to see me again. But you'll only see me again when you let go of this material body and you attain a spiritual body. So he sees once, he explains. So then, okay, but bhava seems so far, so distant. So then we need intermediate goals in our spiritual practice. So okay, right now I'm at Anartha Nivritti, but I want to get to Nishta, and this is my goal. So what does it mean? What does Nishta mean? So there are various definitions of Nishta, but okay, I want to get to that stage. I want to get to that point where Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur says 75% of my material desires, bad habits, have been removed from the heart. I can sit down and chant 16 rounds peacefully with some focus and hear the holy name. And in this way, really cultivate positive, progressive Krishna consciousness, because goals drive us. We work that way. Goals drive us and they inspire us. Otherwise, what happens sometimes in Krishna consciousness is that we just become, it's the same mantra. And every day you got to chant it for a minimum of 1,728 times. Every day. And it's that consistency of having to do it every single day, no break. And over time, we see that devotees become lax, uninspired, hackneyed, mechanical in their devotional service, in their hearing and chanting. And that kind of practice doesn't really inspire Krishna. It doesn't touch Krishna's heart. Because ultimately, our spiritual practices are there to try and attract Krishna's attention so that he'll give us his mercy. We're dependent on Krishna's mercy. But how do we elicit that kind of inspiration in the heart, in Krishna's heart? It really requires some real focus, some real endeavor, and we have to put our heart into our spiritual practices. And that can be difficult to do over months, years, and decades. And therefore having intermediate goals helps us. And knowing what the ultimate goal of Krishna consciousness is, having insight into Krishna. And this beautiful temple room has so many beautiful pictures depicting Krishna's amazing, wonderful pastimes. And as we become absorbed in those, the positive aspects of Krishna consciousness become more and more of a desire in the heart of the sadhaka. I was reading Tamal Krishna, because we're in Dallas, I was reading Srila Tamal Krishna Maharaj's Vyas Puja offering from 1992. Very long, beautiful, amazing Vyas Puja offering. And he's going through so many great personalities in our line and talking about the amazing gifts which we've received from these amazing great acharyas. And ultimately, their mercy is coming to us through Srila Prabhupada. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj is thanking Srila Prabhupada for these various gifts which have come through him from our very illustrious chain of great teachers. And it's amazing. I thought, well, when I saw this, when I read this is 1992. So it's 33 years ago. And what Tamal Krishna Maharaj himself was meditating on and engaging with so relatively early on in our society, it was really amazing. So this is just a little section of that offering. And in this particular part, he's focusing in on the gift of Raghunath Das Goswami. So all of the acharyas have each given us something very special, something very beautiful. They all have their own specialities. So this is Maharaj's insight into what Raghunath Das, or the greatest gift that Raghunath Das Goswami is given. May Srila Raghunath Das Goswami consider me his dependent. He is the principal Rupanuga Vaishnava, the eternal friend and follower of Srila Rupa Goswami. He personally witnessed the most intimate pastimes of Lord Caitanya under the care and guidance of Srila Sarup Damodar Goswami. Lord Caitanya gave him Govardhan as his residence and the service of Srimati Radhika as his only engagement. His sadhana is the standard for all Gaudiya Vaishnavas. As he lay weeping on the banks of Radhakund, his heart breaking in separation from Sri Radhika, his lamentations, vilap, poured forth in the form of a handful of flowers, Kusumanjali. This Shri Vilap Kusumanjali is a central jewel on the necklace of prayers, Stavavali, which always adorn him. I shall keep this jewel as my most valuable treasure and await the time when I may reap its riches. So Vyas Puja Homage, 1992. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj is like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Apani Achari Bhakti, Sikhainu Sabare. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is teaching us how to practice Krishna consciousness. Tamal Krishna Maharaj is also inspiring us how to practice Krishna consciousness and how to cultivate positive spiritual desires in our life so that we can become inspired and they drive us. They drive and infuse our spiritual practices with a certain richness, with a certain taste, with a positive desire to cultivate genuine Krishna consciousness. And then all of the negative aspects, all of the don'ts, all of the things we shouldn't do, that's natural to give up. There's not a question. Because when they say obstacles are what you see when you take your eye off the goal. When you have a clearer idea of what the goal is, what I want to cultivate, and you have some desire to cultivate and really go in that direction, then anything else is an irrelevance. I don't want this because this is getting in the way of my positive cultivation. I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions, comments, corrections, complaints, criticisms. I'm always open to a challenge. I could speak more, but it's always nice to have input. Yes, Mach.
Ready? Yeah, I had a question based on an earlier point that was from the verse in purport, because it seems like a little contradictory that Caitanya Mahaprabhu and his followers gave us the principle of yukta vairagya, and yet he's refusing to associate with a devotee who is practicing yukta vairagya. Because, as you were saying, Maharaj Pratapuruja is a pure devotee, totally absorbed, and he's not looking at the world as objects of sense gratification. He's not looking away from the world, rejecting it as demonic. He's engaging. He's doing his duties and connecting it to Krishna and always absorbed in thoughts of the Lord. Isn't this what we're supposed to be doing? So why would we reject the association of a devotee who's doing that?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Machi. So for sure, I mean, there's many examples. There's many points that we can glean from this pastime. There's the example of Pundarik Vidyanidhi, for example. He's also a great devotee, but he's surrounded by opulence. When Gadadhar Pandit goes to see him, then he's laying on a throne. He has a spittoon there. He's eating some fruits or something and spitting out the seeds in the spittoon. He's surrounded by servants. He's basically living the life of Riley, we say, or in royalty. So then Gadadhar Pandit sees him and he thinks, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sent me here to learn from this person, but look at him. This person is so opulent. He can't be a devotee. He can't be advanced. So then he kind of rejects that association and returns. But then Mahaprabhu sends him back. Actually, he has to return and he learns that actually, no, this is a great... Ultimately, he learns that no, Pundarik Vidyanidhi is a great devotee. Because Mukunda Dutt then talks about Krishna, and then Pundarik Vidyanidhi goes into ecstasy, falls off his throne, he's rolling around and he's in absolute ecstasy. And he realizes that actually, appearances can be deceptive. You can't judge a book by its cover. So we have to go deeper in our understanding of people. We don't know who we're sitting next to at the end of the day. Who knows what is going on in someone's heart? So the way someone dresses, the way someone walks and talks can sometimes be very difficult. It can be very difficult to recognize who's who and what's what. So absolutely, Maharaj Prataparudra, he's a king, but then he facilitates Ramananda Rai, Yukta Vairagya, as you said. He facilitates Ramananda Rai to give up his job, his duty as a governor, and to simply associate with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with a full pension. So he's doing so many wonderful things. But here, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is making a very important point. And sometimes when you want to make a point as a teacher, you go to the extreme. And that point is, be very careful of worldly minded association, because it can ruin your Krishna consciousness. It can ruin your desire or the development of your Krishna consciousness, because it's like poison, and poison spreads. So even a little, I still remember, I was 15 years old, but I still remember conversations that I had with my materialistic school friends. And they stick, because the mind is like wet cement. You know, you ever did that when you were young? You know, workers, repairing a road, the cement's wet, and then, you sort of, put your initials there or something like that. We used to do that when we were young. I was in East London. It wasn't the most refined place to grow up, let's put it like that. But the mind is like wet cement. You put a little mark and it sticks. It stays. And these things disturb the consciousness of the conditioned soul, particularly when we're when we're engaging in acts of devotion. So we have to be very, very careful what we allow our minds to come in contact with. The modern age, we have an information overload, and so much access to so much which is unwanted, undesirable for the aspiring devotee. And therefore we have to be very, very careful what we expose our minds to. And therefore one of the most dangerous things is a satsanga. And therefore Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, I feel, is just making that point very strongly here. Eventually he does give his mercy. So sometimes Mahaprabhu is described, he can be as strong as a thunderbolt and as soft as a rose. And we see that with sadhus, they tend to have that mood. They can just switch and be very, very heavy, very, very strong, and then suddenly so soft and so kind. So Advaita Acharya, when Mahaprabhu's leaving, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he's grieving, Mahaprabhu, you can't leave, please don't go, you can't go, you're ripping our hearts out. And Mahaprabhu just turns around and leaves. So then Kaviraj Goswami says, this is a sadhu, soft as a rose, as strong as a thunderbolt. And so Mahaprabhu is exhibiting various things for us to learn. Is that okay, Machi? Anything to add?
I was wondering if you would have the same way of dealing with someone like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who was similar, right? He was associating with materialistic people, the British government, going to work for many hours a day. Would he also be rejected by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu?
See, here Mahaprabhu is using Maharaj Prataparudra as an instrument for his teaching. He may use Bhaktivinoda Thakur as his instrument also, or he may not. But of course, for an advanced Vaishnav, okay, so we go out, we meet materialistic people, we distribute books, for example, you go to universities and colleges and you do programs, and you have to come in touch with people who are materially tainted, and that can have an effect on the consciousness. So we also have to be careful how deep we go in our interactions with people. There is a protection when we're preaching. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu protects the devotee from those negative influences. But there's always a danger. For someone like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he's a Nityasiddha, Premi Bhakta, and so there's not the same danger, of course. There's not a danger for him. He's trying to give the highest thing to the lowest people. It's okay, Machi?
I was thinking I don't want to hog the mic here. I was thinking maybe he's trying to point out the difference between one who is practicing their devotional service more from like a karma yoga sort of standpoint, connecting their occupation in the service of the Lord, and one who's just doing pure kind of Sanatan Dharma, activities of practicing the 64 angas as their sole activities in life. Because I think there is a distinction.
In this material world, no endeavor, Krishna says, I found this very heartening when I first absorbed this. I read it many times. When I first absorbed it, it was very heartening. That no endeavor is covered by some fault. No, every endeavor is covered by some fault, Krishna says in the Gita. So everything in this material world is faulty. You get in your car and you drive. Imagine how many living entities we kill in that process. When we go out to preach, yes, we're trying to give them Krishna consciousness, we're trying to give them the highest thing, but there's always going to be something negative. You touch the door handle, there's some karmic exchange, from other people. So there's always something negative which comes from everything that we do in this world, every engagement in this world. There's always something. But I guess, I remember Bhakti Charamaj, he would say, get the big things right. And I kind of take some strength from that. That okay, so many details which are imperfect, which aren't quite how they should be, but trying to get the big things right. And in that way, we hope and pray that we get some mercy along the way. Krishna says he fills in the gaps, he carries what we lack, and he preserves what we have. And Akrura, it's described that Akrura, he's in the employ of Kamsa. So when Akrura comes to take Krishna and Balaram away, he literally rips the heart out from the Vrajvasis. They're so pained. And so the Acharyas, they comment that Akrura was beloved to Krishna. He was Krishna's uncle. He loved Krishna. He was a devotee of Krishna. But still he was engaged in such a terrible act of taking Krishna and Balaram away from Vrindavan. How could that be? So the conclusion was that because he was associating with Kamsa, because he was employed by Kamsa, a demonic person, therefore there was some element of his consciousness which was sullied, even though he was a pure devotee. And therefore he was engaged in such an activity. So engagement with the material world in any way, shape or form is always going to cause some tinge of material. That material element will seep in. It's inevitable, in whatever we do. So working in an environment of materialists is, Prabhupada said, work is the punishment for coming to the material world. Who likes to work? Who likes to work? But it's got to be done to pay the bills. But ideally, Prabhupada wanted farm communities where devotees don't have to engage with all of that, and they can just be in an environment which is more protected, surrounded by Vaishnavas, hearing and chanting, and in a pure atmosphere. I live in a city. We're in a city here in Dallas. Why would anyone want to live in a city? It's for preaching, Prabhupada said, for preaching purposes. This is where people congregate. We have huge numbers of people. Otherwise, it's a dog's life. It's not a pleasant environment to live in. The ideal is to have an arena which is away from all of this, where there's more chances of purity in an impure world. Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for a very nice class. We recently we were having the same conversation in class, and we were discussing the difference and similarity between Mahaprabhu reaching out or meeting Ramananda Rai, who was also in a very material position, and then refusing to meet Prataparudra. And Srinath Krishna Prabhu was giving the class, and he was saying that the only difference that he could see was that Mahaprabhu met Ramananda Rai on a devotee's recommendation.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Versus Prataparudra wanting to meet. So that was a very beautiful differentiation.
Yes.
That Prabhu brought up. And my questions, I really appreciate the point you made about obstacles is what you see when you take your eyes off of the goal. That's a very, very beautiful point. And you were bringing out some points about having spiritual goals. So we see that in material life, material goals are very measurable. And you also touched on that point with spiritual goals being more subtle. So, when we have spiritual goals like, sadhana or reading, but when it comes to, purification of, the false ego, etc., and being equipoised if somebody's praising you or criticizing you, those things, how do you go about, even having some measurable, like, do we even consider that? Where was I before? Like, how to measure spiritual, improvements?
Yes. How does it work with class brew? Because I don't want to go on too long. I will give a short answer. Is that good? Yeah. So actually, Madhya, I'm thinking of a book. When I talk about this topic, I'm thinking of a book which really deals with this whole topic, and I can share that with you after. But yeah, so yes, correct. I agree that sometimes it's not as tangible or measurable as material goals, but it can be to a degree. To what degree can I sit down and chant Hare Krishna with focus and attention? To what degree does my mind wander to so many other things? How many rounds can I sit down and just chant? Do I start fidgeting and have to move around or do something else after 6 rounds, 8 rounds? Can I sit down and just chant 16 rounds with focus and attention? So that's one kind of goal, which is a real barometer of how is the development of my Krishna consciousness. I feel chanting is like the litmus test, chemistry, sort of is it acid or alkali, the litmus paper, you have this litmus paper. We used to have this litmus paper. It's a real litmus test for where I'm at in my Krishna consciousness. Do I have a desire to know about Krishna? Am I interested in topics about Krishna? Do I want to know more about him? His name, his form, his qualities, his abode, his associates, and his pastimes? And if not, then the more I read about it, tadbhava, it rubs off. It comes. That connection comes over time. And and then, I don't want to go on too long. It's a big topic, but we can maybe talk afterwards, Machi. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for your kind attention. Granth Raj Shri Chaitanya Charitamrta ki, Shri Shri Radha Kalachand ji ki, Shri Shri Jagnabalde Subhadramai ki, Shri Shri Gaurnitai ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Nittai Gaur Premanandi. Gaur Bhakta Brind ki jai.